Wait, did you see Jesus during your
I
ayahuasca
did.
journey?
At the very end, I saw Jesus. That was like the last moment. And I'm Jewish. I never see Jesus. He doesn't pop into anything.
This memoir, it's unlike any memoir I've ever seen, as I said. Almost 600 pages. And you write in the introduction that this isn't even everything that you've collected.
Yeah.
What made you want to put all of this stuff in a book?
I don't know. I was always a fan of these books like the Marx Brothers scrapbook, and there was a Saturday Night Live scrapbook that came out in the 70s where they would have pictures and scripts and little notes. And I just thought, oh, I think I have enough stuff to do that. My family's always yelling at me to throw out all my hoard from my hoarding. Like, why do we have all this stuff?
Where do you keep it?
There's 7 storage spaces around town and in my office, and they're like, "Why do you save all this stuff?" So I think I needed to prove that there was a reason to be a pack rat.
Wait, you have 7 storage units. At one time, was it all in your house, though?
Well, there was a lot in the house. We have a new house now, and none of it is in the new house.
Okay.
But also, it's not like normal hoarding. It's not like there's a big mound with like, catcher's mitts and kitty litter and
Yeah.
magazines from the 70s. It's a well-maintained hoard.
Organized.
Yes, it's an organized hoard, as organized as it can be.
Did any revelations come to you going through some of that stuff? Like things that in the moment you hadn't thought about, but you're looking through these old scripts or these old bits of paper that have notes from
Yeah.
Freaks and Geeks, for instance, you know?
Well, all of it, I think, is working something out. Like, so if I look at my career, I think, well, I did something about having a baby. I did something about going to high school, something about going to college, something about your first job, something about getting married, trying to make relationships work over the long haul, getting sick, your mortality. So you could feel like, oh, I'm just thinking through, my point of view about the big things that happen to all of us.
Okay, I'm stuck on this word obsession because there's a story in the book where you collected Billie Jean King's
Yes.
autograph 13 times.
Yes. I went to a tennis tournament at Hilton Head Island, and we would go every year, and I was 10 years old. And all of the tennis players were hanging around. This must have been like 1978, 77, something
Yeah.
like that. And there would be Tracy Austin, and there's Pam Shriver, and there's Billie Jean King, and Martina Navratilova, and Dr. Renee Richards. Everybody was there.
Yeah.
And I would just run around on a bike. They'd have a match. I would sometimes watch the match and wait for them to come out. And then I'd get their autograph. And then the next day I would just do it again. And if it was the same people, I would just get all their autographs again. And I remember Billie Jean King saying to me, "I think you have my autograph already."
I know. After a certain point, did you start to have conversations with them? They're like, this kid is,
A little bit. But it was just so fun. I mean,
Yeah.
it was like a weird hobby to go, can I get to Yvonne Goolagong today?
I mean, it's a weird hobby, but it also, why do you think you were doing it?
I think on some level, especially like with trying to meet comedians, I was trying to figure out, is there a way to penetrate that bubble? Like, can that become real? You see them on TV and people are so funny or they're great actors or actresses, but can I meet them? And if I can meet them, then maybe it's a real enough world for me to enter
Hmm.
at some point.
When did that come to mind for you? Not necessarily that you could do it and you could enter it, but that spark of, oh, these people are interesting. I'm kind of fascinated by them.
Well, my grandmother was friends with this comedian named Toady Fields,
Mhm.
and she was, in that world of Joan Rivers type of self-deprecating female comedian, and she was so funny. And my grandparents talked about her like she was the coolest person in the world. And I knew her since I was born, and occasionally we would go see her, and I think on some level I saw her
Mm.
and thought, wow, she's a different kind of person, and she's getting standing ovations and people love her.
Mm.
And it must have planted a seed at a time that I don't even remember.
Yeah.
Like, that would be a cool thing to be able to do.
Seeing the reaction to her action.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a thing.
And someone who could talk about what was weird about themselves and how they saw the world and be rewarded for it, to be embraced for discussing your imperfections.
Okay, you have to tell this story of you threatening Steve
Mhm.
Martin over an autograph.
Well, I was a little kid, and I used to always ask my grandmother to drive by his house because we knew which house he lived in, and I couldn't believe he lived there. This is in 1980, so it's
Yeah.
45 years ago. And, I'm 12 years old. And one day he was outside and I asked him for his autograph. And like a normal human being would, he said, I don't sign autographs at my house. Like for me, if someone knocked on my door,
Right now.
I mean, there's a chance that I'd have a drone police officer get involved. There would definitely be a, a different reaction than Steve Martin had, which was, I'm sorry, I don't sign it at my house. And so I wrote him a funny letter asking for an apology.
It was more than a funny letter.
I basically said, you're the funniest man in the world, but you treat your fans like garbage. And you wouldn't live in that house if I didn't go to all your movies and buy all your albums. And so if you don't send me an apology, I'm going to send your address to Homes of the Stars and you'll have tour buses passing by 24 hours a day. And then like 6 months later in the mail, I got a book of Cruel Shoes, this amazing short story collection he had written. And in it, he wrote, to Judd, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was speaking to the Judd Apatow. And I was 12 years old. And I thought, I must have made him laugh. And then now he's trying to make me laugh. And I look back on it now like it was very, very impactful on my psyche that he sent that to me. Almost an invitation. And I'm sure he just is funny and probably did that to tons of people because he's a great person. But to me, it was like the person I think is the funniest person in the world thought it was worth his time to do that. And so it probably gave me a lot of the confidence that I had to be insane to go interview 50 comedians for my high school radio station and work as a dishwasher in a comedy club. It only like set the fire more for me to try hard to figure out how to get into it.
I think it's also, though, pretty ballsy of you as a 12-year-old to kind of threaten him to say, like, I'm going to give your address out to everybody.
I think that was just my Long Island rat attitude. That part of it, people ask about it sometimes, and I think I was just so obnoxious. I just was like I didn't quite know where humor was. And being from Long Island, there was so much insult humor. And we all gave each other such a hard time. And so in a real annoying Long Island boy way, I thought that was funny.
Was it like that in your home where you guys would
Yes,
with each other?
absolutely. And with my friends. I mean, it was certainly a world of insults with love.
Yeah. Did you ever get to talk to Steve Martin about that? Or
I
show him that
did
letter?
once we were in a meeting together and someone asked me to tell the story. Then afterwards, they said, Steve, is that how you remember it? And he said, how I remember it, I knocked on Judd's door.
Okay, so it didn't it started with these autographs and then it extended to letters. Like you had a whole process. This was almost like an assembly line where you'd write letters to people.
Yes. I realized at some point that if you wrote a letter to someone who was on television, a lot of them would send you a signed autograph. I think I probably had a friend who got an autograph back in the mail. I remember one of my friends got an autograph from Bob Hope.
Mm.
I think it was my friend Josh Rosenthal showed me as Bob Hope. And I'm like, I'm going to write to Bob Hope.
Yeah.
And then I did get an autograph from Bob Hope. And then I did, I wrote a letter to Paul Lynde. And I got an autograph back. So I wrote Paul Lynde again. He sent me another one. I kept writing Paul Lynde to see how many times would he keep sending me the photo. So I have 3 Paul Lynde autographs. And I would just sit in my room at night with this Homes of the Stars book. And on the back page, it had the address of every
Wait, there was
movie
a real
studio.
there was a real
There was a
book.
book that had, so you could go see where Lucille Ball lived, and probably half of it was inaccurate, and it was their addresses from a decade before.
Yeah.
But the back of it was the addresses of all the movie studios and TV networks, and so I would write Carol Burnett and the Saturday Night Live people. I got an autograph from Andy Kaufman, and he signed it on both sides. That was what was so unique. It said, to Judd, thank you very much, Andy Kaufman. But on the other side, he wrote a letter that kind of said the same thing. It just said, dear Judd, thank you for writing that letter, Andy Kaufman. So even that was in Andy Kaufman mode.
I have this letter that you have a copy of.
Yes.
First off,
Mhm.
the book, you have a lot of letters that you wrote to people at certain time
Yes.
periods. How did you get them?
Well, the letter in the book that's my letter to the talk show host Mike Douglas must have been one that I didn't send. And I
Mm.
found it in some stack of papers. But this was the format. If I think you wanted me to read
I want you to read it because, first off, your handwriting's really cute. It's so neat.
at that stage.
Yeah.
It's since fallen apart. It says, "Dear Mike," uh, and so I was very familiar with Mike Douglas. Who was like a
And tell people who Mike Douglas is.
He was
who
like a
don't know.
daytime Johnny Carson.
Yeah, yeah.
So there was Mike Douglas, there was Merv Griffin and
Yeah.
Dinah Shore, and they had shows earlier in the day.
Yeah.
And it was out of Philadelphia. And, it was an amazing show because everyone would go through Philadelphia. He would have on Richard Pryor and Sly and the Family Stone, but Kiss would be on there, and then Bob Hope and that group of people. And he was kind of a creamy,
Mhm.
conservative-looking guy.
Mhm.
And it was really, for me, like a place I would escape to, this Mike Douglas show world, and everyone was so happy and talking about their projects. And so the letter says, "Dear Mike, my name is Judd Apatow, and I am 10 years old. I always watch the Mike Douglas show. It's great. I learn a lot from it. Now, you have the best guests. I'm glad your show moved to Hollywood. Now you get better guests. Yours truly, Judd Apatow." And the funny thing about that is when I found this letter, on top of it was a letter to Merv Griffin, and it said almost the exact same
Same
thing.
Well, I also think what you wrote there was so adult for being 10 years old. So, I mean, you've got this little assembly line where you're writing letters to folks, you are getting autographs. I mean, were you also going outside and just hanging out and playing with
Yes.
friends and stuff?
Yeah, I was, but I wasn't good at sports. So there was always a lot of time where friends would be on the football team or the baseball team, and I was left alone because my friends were the athletes. I was the goofy guy with the athletes. And
Yeah.
so I would just go home and watch Live at 5 with Sue Simmons and write letters. Like any normal kid would do. You go home and you watch Mike Douglas and The People's Court. I mean, I can remember like the things I would watch, and I would also watch All in the Family, Mary Tyler Moore Show, MASH, Bob Newhart, like
Mhm.
every single day, Odd
Yep.
Couple.
Yep.
And those people like Norman Lear and Larry Gelbart and James Brooks programmed my mind of what was funny and what was moral, because I spent so much time hearing those stories.
What a time too, though, because that's when syndication was like really making its
Yeah.
way, and we were receiving all of those old shows. So you
Yeah.
got a chance to really know the greats who weren't even part of your like the generation before you.
Yeah.
They were from several different
Yeah,
generations.
you'd watch The Honeymooners, but every day
Right.
for years
Yep.
and years, and you had this very deep relationship with the characters on the show. I mean, now TV shows are 6 episodes or 8 episodes, and they disappear for 2 years, and after 5 years, there's 30 episodes. But back then, there was always a new episode, and you would watch a show for 7 years or 10 years, and
Yep.
and by the end of it, that's why 100 million people watched the last MASH.
Yep. Here's what fascinates me about your obsessions as a child, because it's not that you were just a fan. It was also that you were seeking something.
Mhm.
And maybe like it was almost a telegraph to your future self. I mean, now we can
Yeah.
see that so
Mhm,
clearly.
mhm.
But were you thinking those things? Were you daydreaming about that stuff when you were writing these letters and thinking about these people?
I thought that life wasn't so easy now, but I think as a result of this interest, it will get easier later.
Mm.
So I had this sense of one day you're going to get to be a part of this, and right now no one cares about it at all. You don't have any friends to talk about it with in the way you would like to, but somewhere there's a world where people care about Bob Hope's monologue
Yep.
or whatever like show business thing it was. And then I did move to California to go to USC Cinema School in 1985, and I met all those people. It turned out I was right, all the comedians, all the filmmakers, that there was a place where all the Judds of their high school congregated.
Met up. Right. You guys
Yeah.
all met up.
It was a nerd convention.
Right. It was the the comedy nerd convention. But you mentioned like things weren't so great when you were a kid. There's also you describe it as a
Yeah.
nasty divorce
Yeah.
with your parents.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very 1970s, early 80s thing. I mean, now everybody consciously uncouples, and
Yeah.
people understand the effect it has on your kids when you're in conflict. But back then, no one knew, and it was like a bare knuckle brawl. And so things didn't get resolved, and no one knew to check in on their kids to see how it was affecting them.
Mm.
No one said to me, "How are you feeling?" And so as a result, I internalized everything, and I just thought, "Oh, I need to take care of myself."
Mm.
And my parents, are great. My dad, like once my dad, I said to him like a few years ago, like, "You never talked to me about any of it," and he said, "Yeah, I did." And I said, "No, you didn't. You never like said, 'How are you doing?'" And in fact, the only thing that really helped me was like there was a book in the house called Growing Up Divorced, and I looked at a couple of pages of it once, and it like explained some of the dynamics of what this conflict was about in a way I could understand. And my dad goes, "Yeah, I left that book out for you." And I went, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, I left it on the coffee table." I said, "You left the book on, that's how you
That's how he
communicated with me?"
communicated
And
with
I
you.
said, What are you talking about?" He's like, "It worked." And I went, "But you never asked me if I read it. You didn't know I read it." And so that was the 70s,
Totally.
in a nutshell, in terms of communication, that even very nice people with the best of intentions, they didn't know from their families,
Mhm.
how to tune into each other. And so as a little kid, it just made me confused most of all. And I think part of that led to being fascinated by people like George Carlin or Mel Brooks, who broke down society and
Mm.
broke down how families work and religion works and poked holes in things and challenged things. And so I think that was part of the obsession.
Did you ever talk to your parents about your dreams? What did they think about your obsessions?
They were so helpful and so supportive, and they were the reason why I was into it, because my dad had a big interest in comedy. And so the house was filled with Lenny Bruce records and Bill Cosby records and Woody Allen records. And so they treasured that stuff. And they also thought comedians were the coolest people. And when I said I wanted to be a comedian, they're like, "Great." And so if I wanted to go to an open mic at a comedy club at 17, my dad would drive me to Chuckles and then come back 2 hours later in the middle of the night to pick me up. Like, they thought I would make it.
Hmm.
And so I think somewhere in me, that gave me a lot of confidence, because when I talked to them about it, it was like there was no chance that I wouldn't make it.
Tell me a little bit about your granddad, Bobby Shad. You
Yeah.
say he's basically one of the founders of the music industry as
Hmm.
we know it.
He was a man from the Bronx, and after World War II, I think he would take the money from his job and hire jazz players to record songs. He would get them printed up himself and then go to the record stores and sell them by hand. And then at some point got hired by labels to run their jazz and blues departments. So he was, one of those people who figured out, how do you record jazz? Where do the microphones go?
Mm.
Like he was, a real innovator. And he did Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie
Dinah
music,
Washington.
Dinah Washington, Cannonball Adderley. He produced the first Janis Joplin album. And he was a real inspiration because he was a hustler, and it made me think, oh, you have to create your own path.
Mm.
And he just did it. And so it was always interesting to have someone in your family that there was this feeling about, like, oh, this is a really special person doing something really fun and important.
Yeah. What did you see? Because I would
Hmm.
guess a lot of those
Hmm.
stories you would hear,
Hmm.
but what were some of the things that you would see in him?
I used to go to his office. He had an independent label in New York. I never went to the recording studio, but a lot of it was just how he talked about it, because he loved jazz so much and was so passionate about it.
Mm.
And I think I became obsessed with comedy in the way he was obsessed with jazz. And I felt there was a connection, because a lot of the comedians like Lenny Bruce started by performing in the jazz clubs. And so it all felt very much part of the same uh, world.
Were you listening to jazz too when you were young, or was it around you in your house? And
I would listen to it when I became a DJ for my high school radio station. And so I was very excited to be a jazz DJ when I was, 16 years old. And then I would put on all these records, none of which I understood.
mm,
These, Herbie Hancock
mm.
experimental albums and Miles Davis records and Larry Coryell. And I so wanted to understand it so I could connect with my grandfather.
This high school radio station. I mean, They don't make these like that anymore. There's nothing
Yeah.
like that. I don't even know anything like that. What was it? WKWZ. Those
Yes,
were the
it's still
call
there
letters.
in Syosset on Long Island, and they're still there. And it was run by this teacher, Jack DeMacy, who was very, very inspirational. He was our Dead Poets Society guy, and he basically pushed all of us to use the radio station to do whatever you wanted to do. If you were into sports, use it to talk to professional athletes and learn how to report and do play-by-play. If you're into music, a lot of people would go to concerts and write reviews and interview artists. So my friend Josh Rosenthal, he would go interview people like REM in the early 80s. And he said, oh, maybe you should try to interview comedians. And so I created a show called Club Comedy, and I got a tape recorder, and I would go off and kind of trick comedians into doing interviews with me, which was easier.
How would you trick them?
I just wouldn't tell them it was a high school radio station, and I would just call a publicist and say, I work for WKWZ. Does Mr. Leno have any time while he's doing Rascals in New Jersey to speak with me? And I would show up with some huge tape recorder from the school, from the AV squad, and they would all tolerate me.
This wasn't just like a few people, though. I mean, you interviewed, as you said, like 50,
Yeah.
50 folks.
Mm-hmm.
Did anyone ever turn you down? These are big names.
Well, there were people I couldn't get to. I couldn't get to Dangerfield. I couldn't figure out how to get to Andy Kaufman, who was down south wrestling at the time.
Oh, he was doing that.
So I would call the management office, and they were like, we don't know where he is. We haven't talked to him in months. But people like Howard Stern and Sandra Bernhard and John Candy talked to me, and Harold Ramis, and they had good advice. I mean, I was asking them, how do you write a joke? How do you get on stage? How do you write a movie? And they would answer. And I look back now and go, what a head start I had. And a lot of it was just about work ethic, them just explaining what it takes to make it. Like, it's going to take a long time, and you have to find your voice. Things that I had never heard about before.
But you never really told them that you wanted to be a comedian. I mean, I guess it was pretty obvious, but you never said anything.
I never said it.
Why?
At some level, I was so embarrassed to say I want to do it.
Yeah.
And it was the most obvious thing in the world that that's what I was doing. But I never would say I want to be a comedian.
Was there ever a moment that you remember that they gave you advice or anything that you were thinking, yes, that has come back to you in real measure?
I mean, a lot of it did. And just hearing about their failures and knowing that it was hard made me realize that the only way to make it is to be able to withstand an enormous amount of rejection and to be willing to work hard to get better, and that would not be a short process. So a lot of people said, oh, it takes like 7 years to find your voice as a comedian. Well, to hear that as a 16-year-old is good, because you don't think, oh, it's supposed to happen now. It's like becoming a doctor. It's going to take a really long time. So I think it set my timer in a good way. And then they all talked about bombing. So when I bombed, I didn't feel like I should quit the business. I thought, oh, this is part of it. I'm in it now. And even Jerry Seinfeld told me about the first time he did stand-up, and he said he got so scared that he just said the names of his jokes. Just like school, your parents, because he panicked. But knowing that someone that I looked up to panicked like that, gave me a lot of fortitude when I was bombing and when I was panicking. Like, oh, this is part of it.
Tell me about that first time you got on stage.
The first time I went on stage, I'm sure it was so terrible. It was at Chuckles Comedy Club in Mineola.
Which is a fun name.
Exactly, which was a great comedy club. And there was a very vibrant comedy scene at that time. I had just been a dishwasher and a busboy at a club called Eastside, and I would work there and spend all the money I made there on the cab home. But I just wanted to be in a club, and Rosie O'Donnell was just starting out then. Eddie Murphy was still coming in. He was 21 years old back then. And so the first time I did it, I had a joke where I said to the crowd, I don't know how to handle hecklers because this is my first time doing it. So I thought maybe we could practice that you could heckle me and I can learn how to respond. And so if you all could heckle me right now, Let's get this started.
Where did you get that idea from to even do
I
that?
don't know. And then people just started cursing and screaming, and they wouldn't stop for like a really long time. And my friends were with me, and they started yelling at people, and it just became like almost a riot where I couldn't get them to be quiet again. Because the joke was supposed to be that they would just scream out, screw you or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was going to take a pause and go, see, yeah, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. I haven't figured it out yet. But that was the first time.
How did it feel?
It was really fun. It was like, oh, this is possible.
Mm.
And so it did make me want to go do it. But I was so scared. I mean, I would just be falling apart before every spot for the first few months.
You only did stand up for a short time. I mean, you did it for a moment in high school, and then
Hmm.
you graduated high school. You
Hmm.
went to USC.
Hmm.
You dropped out of USC,
Hmm.
and you did stand up for just a short period
Hmm.
of time.
Well, like I did it for about 7 years.
That's okay. That's
Yeah.
a
And then
significant
I
amount of
stopped for a
time.
few decades, and then I started again in 2014.
What do you get out of being up on stage today versus then? I mean, then you were doing your seven
Hmm.
7 years of
Hmm.
just trying to
Yeah.
get reps and understand what your voice is. And
Yes.
then a few years ago, you come back to it after a very long span of not doing
Mhm.
stand up, but doing just about everything
Yeah.
else in comedy.
Well, I realized that I wasn't having as much fun as I wanted to have, that the fun was with the audience. So I was spending most of my life in editing rooms because you shoot a movie over a few months, but then you're alone writing for a year or two, and then you're editing for 6 months.
Hmm.
And then I would go see Amy Schumer when we were working on Trainwreck, and she was on fire
Hmm.
with her stand up and having the best time. So one night I just said, I'm going to go up just to show you what it was like when I did it. And she was really excited to watch me bomb. She was sure it was going to be this disaster. And luckily, I had a couple of old stories I told, and I did well enough that at the Comedy Cellar, they said, hey, if you ever want to come in, come in. So when we shot Trainwreck, I went in every night after the shoot and would do stand up, and it just reignited my interest in doing it. And I like the idea of writing something and being able to go up and say it that night. There's something just that is the reason why you like comedy is that.
How did you know that you could write?
Did some writing at USC Cinema School. I studied screenwriting, and I when I lived with Adam Sandler after college, we wrote some sketches together, and there was one sketch we did on the Fritz Coleman variety show, which was like a local show on NBC after Saturday Night Live. And then I got a job writing for Tom Arnold, and he had a few specials where they were like kind of reality comedy, but we had written sketches to set them up like film pieces. And people like Martin Mull and Jim Carrey and young Ben Stiller and Frank Zappa did these like intro sketches that we all would write. And with Stephen Leo were the other writers, these great comedy writers. And so I saw some of that come alive. And then when I met Ben, I really learned how to write by working with Ben.
Really?
How to write
Yeah.
sketches, because
Yeah.
he had an MTV show, which was really brilliant and groundbreaking, similar to the Larry Sanders Show before the Larry Sanders Show, where he was the host of a sketch show on MTV, and you saw the behind the scenes
Yep.
of
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
and it was really special.
All those people, though, are so different. They're
Mm.
so different in their comedy and their approach. How did you come to understand the approach to take for everybody? Like, what were you looking for? What are you looking for when you're working with someone who's like you're just meeting them and you're trying to
Yeah.
understand the thing?
Well, I think when you're young, you're in some ways able to get in other people's heads because you haven't figured out your own yet. So I didn't really know what my point of view was as Judd, but I could sit with Roseanne and write jokes with her
Hmm.
and imagine I was her.
Mm.
And that was just a skill I had as a young person trying to break in. And I could do that with a lot of different people. And it took a long time for me to figure out how to do, to tell stories that were based on my own point of view. That took like another 10 years to really understand what that meant. And that's what I learned from Gary when Gary Shandling was doing the Larry Sanders Show. It was so personal. And I watched him write and pitch all the stories for these episodes. And I saw the process he went through of how he mined his inner world for the show.
Hmm. Gary Shandling was like a father to
Hmm.
you.
He was like a real like older brother or father figure in the sense that he really was so nice to me. And so I was, in California trying to get my career going. I wrote jokes for him for the Grammys one year, and then he really took me under his wing uh, to help, write things. He was on the pilot of the Ben Stiller show. That's part of what helped us get picked up, was that his involvement made us look like we were,
Legitimate.
yeah. But then when the show got canceled, he hired me as a writer on the Larry Sanders Show. And that gave me all the direction because I didn't know how to really write stories yet. And when he hired me, he didn't say, oh, this is going to be helpful for me. He said, you're going to learn a lot. And so in ways I didn't quite understand, he was being really, really giving to me. Then he asked me to co-run the show one season, like 5 years later. And then he asked me to direct the show. And only later did I realize, every step of the way, Gary was the bridge to the next step. And he never had kids. And after he passed, I thought, in a way, he was so kind to me because I played that part in his life. And I always thought he wanted to treat me the way he wished his parents had treated him. Like almost like he wanted to show that was possible. And so it was a really important relationship. I mean, he's still, in my head all the time to this day.
One of the things that, the Larry Sanders Show was so brilliant. And one of the things about it is that it satirized, Hollywood and stardom and this need for that type of like attention. And did you guys ever talk about that need? Like, because there's like that need for attention that can never quite be satiated.
Well, Gary understood this issue that I think has taken over the world, which was, do I exist if I'm not on TV? I saw that written in one of his like journals or joke journals. And he was on Letterman once, and I think he might have said, where you been? He's like, I've been living my life. I just haven't been on TV. And I think now the whole world feels that way. Back then it was just, celebrities or performers. Now everyone is on Instagram or TikTok. And so you have an entire, not just country, world where everyone is checking how many views they're getting and how many likes they're getting. And they have the same anxiety
about being
about
away. Yeah.
how many people care about me, and is my self-esteem just based on outsiders approving of me? And that's what the Larry Sanders Show was about. But it's like the whole world became Larry Sanders and that neurotic.
Did you guys ever talk about your obsessions?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I interviewed Gary when I was in high school. And when I interviewed Gary, I asked him what he wanted to do with his career, because he was young then. And he said, I'd like to do a TV show where I would probably play myself. And he knew, and it took, a few more years for him to get that going. But he already had a vision for what he thought he should do.
Yeah. You did a documentary about him, and he was a Buddhist. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know if he said he was a Buddhist or just interested in all of that.
He was interested in all of that. He introduced you to that spiritual world.
Yes.
Yeah. Because you didn't grow up. Did you grow up with religion, with spirituality?
I mean, we were Jewish, but we didn't, observe or go to temple. My parents didn't say anything positive or negative about it. It was really just a black hole. No one said this is BS. No one said this is important. It just wasn't discussed in a way that I never really understood. There was just no energy around it.
Yeah.
So everyone was very moral, and all the lessons I was being taught were like very good. And I'm sure most in a Jewish tradition, but there was no talk of God, or is there anything else going on in the universe? And I think that's part of why I was interested in comedy, because I had this huge hole of what is all this about.
So did you see that as a positive or a negative thing, that your parents just didn't say anything?
I don't even define it other than it's just what happened, which led me to explore and try to figure out what I make of things. And so when I met Gary, I remember he gave me a book called A Feather on a Fan. And that was the first Buddhist book I ever read. And then he gave me another one that was called Transforming Problems into Happiness. And the Buddhist premise of it was, when bad things happen, you should celebrate because it's an opportunity to learn something. So maybe you're going to learn about strength or about compassion or about suffering. And I never heard anything like that before. Wait a second, there's something good when bad things happen. And I was just so empty of philosophy,
Mm,
and so I got really into learning more about it, and I'm still interested in it.
yeah. You took a ayahuasca journey.
I did take an ayahuasca
This was
journey.
recent though, right?
Yeah,
Or
in the
the
last couple of years.
Wait, did you see Jesus during your
I
ayahuasca
did.
journey?
At the very end, I saw Jesus. That was like the last moment. And I'm Jewish. I never see Jesus. He doesn't pop into anything. But at the very end, I saw Jesus on the cross. And I had this very strong feeling of, oh, I get what that means.
Oh, what
Just,
what does it mean? What
it
did it
just,
mean to you?
like in the moment, I thought, he's there for us in a way to show us how we should be there for each other.
Mm,
And that's all life is
mm.
being there for each other. And it was very impactful and stayed with me. And it led to me downloading the New Testament read by Johnny Cash on Audible.
Have you listened
I
to it?
haven't listened to it yet, but I do have it on Audible. But I
Wow.
also thought I don't need any of it because that's all it is. So
Is that message?
yeah, you could complicate it and come up with, you know, he said this and he said that and that meant this and that meant that and all the ways people fight in the world about everything.
Mm,
But if all you really thought was, am I there for other people in a real way? Doesn't that cover all of it?
mm. So fascinating.
It is so interesting that it even exists. And yeah, maybe it just comes from my own head. And maybe when I was 14, I saw Jimmy Swaggart on TV and he said something similar, it just popped back in my head. Like, I don't know what it is or where it comes from, but it also just feels truthful to me. Like I did a documentary about Mel Brooks that's going to be on HBO in January.
Mm,
And I said, what advice do you give your grandkids? What do you take from your 99 years here on Earth? And he said, be kind.
mm,
And that's what works best for me. Like in
mm,
this moment, am I being kind?
mm. Documentary filmmaking, the last few years, you have really been
Mhm,
on a roll,
mhm,
going back and revisiting all these folks that you really admire.
yeah.
What was the turning point for you to say, I want to document these things?
I always loved documentaries. I didn't know how to get into it or what that path was. I met this man who I direct with a lot of the time, Michael Bonfiglio. I was doing a show called Iconoclasts, and Lena Dunham and
Such a
I
good,
were the
yeah,
subjects, and
yeah.
Mike was the director. And I just thought, this guy is so good.
Mm,
And we became friends, and someone asked me to do a 30 for 30 about well, they didn't tell me about what. They said, would you do a 30 for 30 documentary for ESPN? And I had this idea to do one about Dwight Gooden and Darryl Strawberry. And I asked Mike to do it with me, and
yeah.
that's the first one we did. And we've since did a bunch together, like the Gary Shandling one and George Carlin. There was one on Don Rickles, one on the Avett brothers, and
Mhm,
we just finished up Mel Brooks and
mhm,
have a Norm Macdonald documentary coming out later in the year.
mm. What do you think you're searching for when you excavate so deep? Because I mean, this is work you've been doing
Hmm.
since you were 10. You've just
Uh,
been digging and digging
yeah.
and digging.
I mean, it's probably just as simple. What is the meaning of life? Like, why are we here? What are we doing? What is the purpose of this? Some of the movies have been about that, like Funny People, but I like I like tracking someone's entire life and looking at it and seeing what they did with their work life, but also what they did with their personal life and what lessons did they learn along the way.
Yeah.
And near the end, where did it end? What did they take from it? What was their ultimate lesson from that experience? So in a way, I do think it's connected to not having religion as a kid and looking at the experiences of people, both in documentary and in writing fictional characters and going, how are you doing? How's it going?
Mm.
What strategies are you using to get through this? What is this about? How do you give it meaning?
What do you think comedians, or why do
Mhm.
you think comedians are the ones to really dig, to try to find those answers through?
I don't know. I mean, certainly there are a lot of comedians who've had traumatic childhoods, but there are some who are just really smart and talented, who are just really insightful and funny. But I think it's a universal experience. We're all just trying to understand what we should be doing.
What do you think the role of a comic should be, especially in this moment? There's no one quite
Mhm.
like Carlin in this moment that's speaking that type of truth to power?
Yeah, I mean, other than, Jimmy Kimmel and Jon Stewart and Colbert and John Oliver and Samantha Bee. I mean, there are people that do the most incredible work trying to analyze all of this and be funny about it. I don't think it's the role of all comedians. I mean, the main role of a comedian is to make you laugh and make you happy. And I think that's one subset of comedy is political comedy. We don't want everyone to get pulled into it because we want, our, Stephen Wright type comedians. We want just people who are really, really funny who don't talk about it because, we also need a break from it. So we both need it and don't need it. Just like with music, one day you might want to listen to classical and one day you might want to listen to heavy metal.
No, but Judd, there's something in particular about comedians that of course, you love comedy, you love what they do, but the searching, the digging for, in every way, their process, their motivation, what drives them. Like, what is it about comedians?
I don't know if I have a specific answer. It's the only language that I understand that can be used to decode everything. Because it is about looking at things from all these different angles. I mean, there's the laugh part, but that's probably almost the least interesting part. The exchange of ideas that lead to the laugh is what's more interesting.
I want to ask you about something I know that you've had to have thought about. Because of your Carlin documentary, because of your own politics. There's this tension now between comedy as a business and comedy as truth-telling. And we saw that with this Saudi Arabia festival where a bunch of comics went. And they got a lot of money for it, but Human Rights Watch called it an attempt to whitewash Saudi repression because they had to sign something saying that they wouldn't kind of like make fun of the Saudi government. As someone who thinks deeply about comedy and comics and the role, I mean, what goes through your mind when you see that kind of thing?
I just feel bad for the world in general with all of it, right? So you have a regime that is terrible to its own people. And suddenly they're like, we're going to buy golf and we're going to buy all these sports and we're going to try to buy comedy so that you don't question what we're doing here. We're going to make it seem like we're okay. But really, if you say something bad about us, you might go to jail and never get out. And I think it puts a lot of people in a terrible position. People are trying to make money and support their families. And now they have to figure out the ethics of, all right, I won't play for them, but I kind of play for these people. And I've kind of done a show at this stadium, which is owned by this person who's a terrible person. And so I have compassion to both sides. I do understand why people say, don't take money from people who are doing, mass executions and sometimes of people who are just speaking out for their own civil rights. That makes sense. And other people, they have a very strong point of view that if you don't infiltrate the culture of that country, they're never going to know what they're missing and they're never going to want to fight to expand that.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective.
And I've talked to people on both sides of the issue, and everyone is very, very passionate. And it's sad that it makes comedians fight with each other because it's kind of not what we're all supposed to be doing.
Did you kind of get embroiled in that when that whole thing was happening, like having conversations with folks?
I didn't get embroiled in any of it. I mean, I talked to friends about it. I more feel sympathy for everyone because we're not the people running the repressive government. We're trying to make people laugh. We're trying to connect with people. And so it creates these ethical dilemmas that, each person has to decide for themselves where do they stand. I wasn't asked to go. I didn't have to make
that choice,
that decision. I didn't have to find out what my price was. But so I just wish everyone, got along better and that we don't get pulled into the polarity that we see in the rest of the country. We don't want the comedy community to be at each other's throats the way the rest of the country is.
The comedy world that you write about in this book that you have really showcased for us all these years, it does seem like it's a close-knit community, even though it's comprised of so many people. Is it still that way today?
I think so, because there's only a few hundred people doing it. Yeah. So there's, how many comics are there? There's, a few hundred, say there's 500. in the whole country. And I think we all have a lot of empathy for each other because we know how hard it is to do well. It's not the easiest life. There's a lot of traveling, and it's certainly not consistent.
Mm.
It's not a stable career. And some people go to the stratosphere, but most people are just working really hard to be good at what they do and to be able to support themselves. So I think that, whenever you meet a comedian, you feel close to them because like you both understand something that other people don't understand.
Judd Apatow, and thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.